Hey everyone, we're very excited to have Manon back for a part 3 on the state of the PP loan situation. For those of you who don't know, Manon serves as partner and CEO of Engaged Practice Growth Specialists, a firm that helps doctors build engaged, high-performing teams that ultimately increases their profitability. She has a Juris Doctorate law degree from the University of Dayton and a bachelor's degree in history with a minor in financial accounting from Miami University in Ohio. In her day-to-day responsibilities, Manon is often tasked with handling practice, financial analysis, which makes her our resident expert in all things PPP. Manon, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Here we go again.
Yeah, so this has been an adventurous ride.
Yeah. Like, welcome to another episode of Is This Still Happening? It is.
Yeah, one day I'll be telling my grandkids about all this and they probably won't.
Exactly. So we were talking about the PPP loan several weeks ago when this first started, and I think unfortunately we're kind of all at the mercy of the timing of the government and our individual lending institutions, and trying to, I know all of my clients have been really struggling with, when do we apply for the loan? If they applied, then the next question is, did it get approved? In some cases with larger banks, people don't even know if their application was accepted or approved.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we dealt with that with the Wells Fargo. It's kind of in this weird limbo state.
Yeah, exactly. And I've heard that about most of the big banks. Some of our clients that have smaller local banks actually received both EIDL loan funding, the initial $10,000 grant, as well as at least notification that their PPP loan was accepted and will be dispersed, and they were given a time frame.
I know I've always been about having big banks with my business, but I seriously think I'm going to do a good tour of Charleston local banks now because I have not been happy with the experience.
Yeah, we feel the same
way. Like a number.
We feel the same way. And I think that the big banks, I think, everybody has probably read by now and understands that businesses that we wouldn't consider to be, like businesses that you and I and our clients wouldn't consider to be small businesses, have figured out loopholes and ways to apply for multi-million-dollar loans under this program. And so the funding was tapped out almost as soon as it was available. And I think also everyone knew from the beginning that was going to happen. People in the government, people outside of the government were saying, we're going to need additional funding for this program, which is why I definitely understood the pressure that, our clients were under, which is trying to figure out how to time this appropriately. And that's really difficult because there are lots of moving parts here. You have the ADA, which is issuing guidelines. Mm-hmm. Then you have your state dental societies, which are, having a little more direction in terms of when doctors can reopen and what that's going to look like in terms of, how many employees, how many patients can you see, what other kinds of restrictions might be in place and for how long.
Yeah.
And then trying to time all of that with the disbursement of these loans, because nobody wants to bring their staff back off of unemployment, if they're not open. That doesn't really make sense. And it's not really the purpose of the law. I mean, the purpose of the law is to be able to pay people and for people to stay employed. Yeah. And so as long as they're at home, it makes more sense for the business, for them to be taking their unemployment. So I really sympathize with everyone in terms of the timing of this and how to try to, strategically put all those pieces into place. And then you're also in that situation where you feel this pressure, like, hurry up and apply. The money's running out. Like, the money ran out before it started.
I know. At least I expected that to happen and felt confident they were going to do something about it. Seems like they have. But.
Yeah. And I mean, I assumed, and maybe I'm too optimistic when it comes to the government, but I felt like this was a situation where the government's hands are tied. I mean, unless you want a full economic crash, like another Great Depression, they're going to have to continue to, infuse the economy with different kinds of stimulus. And small businesses make up a huge percentage of our economy. So
Oh, absolutely.
the government really has no choice. I mean, they have to keep funding this. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see this funded again.
So they're highly incentivized to do this as well,
Yeah,
to keep everything going. Yeah, we have to keep spending. If we're not doing that, then what happens?
Exactly. And this has only been like a month that we were talking about this, right? And now we're like, okay, now we're on to part 3 and more funding for the SBA loans. And I think that in another month or two, we're going to see more. So for me, from the beginning, and I think in our kind of industry, the big CPA firms were sort of at odds about this from the beginning. And I kind of, I was listening to Kane Waters a lot, and I feel like I was in agreement with them from the beginning, which was, their advice I thought was sage, which was to wait, because we probably are going to see more funding. And number 2 was kind of like, if you got this funding before your employees are back to work, what are you going to do with it? Mm-hmm. I mean, because 75% has to be spent on payroll. So that leaves you only with a couple of options, which would be to bring all of the employees back and start paying them, but back virtually. So you're bringing them back onto payroll just to pay them.
Yeah.
But then when you reopen, now payroll is on you. And the whole purpose would be to sort of, soften the blow of reopening when starts are probably going to be down. Production overall is going to be down this year, no matter how you cut it. And so to have that 2 months of payroll covered for you actually is hugely beneficial to all of our clients. I mean, I think it's really going to soften the blow of, the other fallout that we're going to see from the virus. So that advice to wait, I thought, was good advice, because now we see that this additional funding is coming. I would assume by the end of the week that we'll see the money becoming available through the SBA. Mm-hmm. It was just passed yesterday by the Senate. So I think by the end of the week, we should see that signed into law. And I think it'll be exactly like the last time. There will be this huge rush on the banks. And so that's kind of a strategic part of the strategic plan that everyone needs to think about. If I had applied for this loan and hadn't been approved, or didn't know, even if my bank received the documents.
Yeah.
It's something that, sadly, I've heard that repeatedly. Have you heard this?
I've experienced a little bit of it, but I haven't heard of any from any of our clients. But we have it right now. We've applied to Wells Fargo. And then as soon as PayPal started, we did it through there. And actually, PayPal is at least communicating with us in a way.
PayPal is doing the PPP loans?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know about this.
Yeah, so we applied for it like a few days after they were approved to do it. So, yeah.
And you heard back from them, they said?
Oh, yeah. Well, first, we did it. I applied. Then I checked the system the next day, and it said there was no record of any application. So I was like, oh, great. That was a big whole waste of time. And then later that day, we got an email that said, oh, thank you for getting an application, and you're in a pending status. And then they told us a few days ago that the funding's run out, but we're still processing your loan with anticipation that it's going to be.
Oh, perfect.
It's moving forward even during this weird time. So
okay,
I feel like they'll more likely.
That leads me to my next point, which is, some banks are going to keep the application that you have hopefully on file with them if you applied after the initial funding.
Yeah.
Some banks are not keeping those, and it will be an entirely new process. And the only way to find out is going to be to get in contact with someone at your bank, which...
Oh, that'll be easy.
No problem. Just pick up the phone and call. But that's been an issue that everyone has had as well, is actually getting kind of a warm body on the phone that has any decision-making capability at all anyway. Other than like the general kind of bank service number. So those are kind of the steps that I would encourage everyone to do today would be, if you apply during the initial, then contact your bank, make sure that your application is still on file, or find out if you need to do an entirely new application. Mm-hmm. The other thing that you need to do is, if you didn't apply and you were waiting, which I think was probably smart, if you were waiting to apply, I would have all of your ducks in a row right now, because it looks like the last time that it happened, within probably 24 hours, the money was gone, I would say. Everybody kind of, and this is really just like it's a little less than double what was there for the original PPP loan. So
is it? It's almost.
Yeah, there's an additional 310 billion. So I think the first one was like 340, 320, something like that. So It's almost double. But what that tells me is that it's going to be a really similar process. So probably, I would say 24 to 48 hours after they make the announcement that the SBA is releasing the funds and that banks can now process the applications, I think they'll be saying we ran out of money within a couple of days.
Okay.
But I would still say this situation that we're in is not going away. I'm going to kind of relate it a little bit to like a little personal note, if I'll take a little kind of detour for a minute.
Yeah.
I'm in a group of moms. We were all planning our son's senior graduation party. There are like 6 of them, and they've been best friends since middle school. And it's interesting because this group of moms, they kind of text every day, and the questions, they're not really about like what's going to happen in the fall or what's going to happen next winter or this time next year, but do you think we could postpone the graduation party that's supposed to be in May by a couple of weeks?
Yeah.
And I feel like the Debbie Downer on this text thread. So like, I don't want to say like, I don't think there's going to be a graduation party.
Yeah, totally.
Or maybe we should be talking to our kids about the fact that they might be going to virtual college for a while. But so I like to be a realist, and I look at things, I'd always rather be surprised by good news anyway than, the other way around.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right? Like if somebody in September says, oh my God, we fast-tracked a vaccine, great. That's awesome. But until then, I would prepare for, the very real possibility that this is going to be part of our working lives and our personal lives for, the foreseeable future, probably the next 18 months, 24 months. And so what does that kind of mean for the way
that's such a scary thought, 18 months to 24 months.
It is a scary thought. But I was encouraging these moms in my text thread. I said, we all kind of operate differently. So like, I guess emotionally and mentally, if it works better for you to take it one day at a time and say like, we're going to postpone this party until the first week of June, and then the first week of June comes and now we say July, and we just continually keep pushing things off. I would rather, for me, it's easier for me to say, yes, it's most likely not going to happen. If something changes that, great. And if not, then at least I had mentally prepared. So I think it's good to kind of always be stretching in the direction of like where things are probably going. And then if something positive happens, that can change that up, then we'll deal with that. But so in terms of, the funds for this, while I do think that everyone will be opening in some sort of capacity over the next month. So I think right now strategically is a great time to apply for this. I also think that there will be opportunities for other SBA loans, if not an extension of the PPP for a third time. Maybe there will be something similar or something else. But I do think that this will continue as long as we're dealing with this situation.
Yeah.
So, because the PPP covers 8 weeks of payroll, we're going to be working in some capacity over the rest of the year. So, to me, it's kind of as long as it is short, like when those 8 weeks occur. So I think applying for this round, or if there is a next round, I think either of those are safe bets, that you're going to get most of the loan forgiven because you should have employees back in some capacity over the next month or two. So that was, my initial was just on that first round of funding, even though they kind of terrified everyone into saying we need to take this loan right away because the funds are running out. I think that there may be people that were lucky enough or unlucky enough to get approved for that loan that are now kind of like sitting on this money, and they're either going to have to prepay it or they're going to have a loan at 1%. And even though that's
at least
a really
that's
low,
not the worst case scenario. At least if you went into it knowing that's a possibility, I mean, if you're a growing business, you have use for a 1% loan anyway.
Right. It is. But the only thing that I would say about it is because the loan term itself is short, the 18 months,
Yeah.
you have a 6 months deferment, but the interest such that it is does accrue during the 6 months. If you didn't have a large portion of that loan forgiven, and most of my clients, those loans are 6-figure loans because of the payroll that they have, that's a fairly sizable monthly payment, like $2,000 to $3,000 a month maybe. And
So if you don't need it, you would say just prepay it.
Right. If you don't need it, I would probably prepay it because you are going to see production numbers drop a little bit. And so if you're not using the loan for the purposes it's intended for, then I would probably prepay those amounts so that you're not carrying that unless, if you're really cash strapped, you may have to tap into that. And then as long as, what that monthly payment is going to look like and it seems doable, then, I would say that would be okay.
You could probably do a hybrid of it too, till there's more certainty as to what's going to happen.
Right.
Like, will you be maybe cash strapped in a few months?
Right.
I mean, we're applying for it now, but we don't necessarily need it right now. Everyone is still paying their retainers. We're working hard and doing it, but it's sort of we're doing it just in case. What's the next few months going to look like? We don't
exactly know. Right. Nobody knows. And that's also why I'm a fan of the EIDL loan. And actually, we have clients who have received the initial $10,000 from the EIDL loan.
Yeah.
And EIDL was another one, maybe worse than the PPP in terms of, their website was not functioning. People spend a lot of time doing the applications and they never received any kind of, certification or notification, anything from the SBA saying, yes, you applied, we have your application, and like, this is what to expect. But then I have some clients that just received like the $10,000 direct deposited into their account and were surprised by it.
Wow. Interesting. So it's just all over the map, huh?
Right. It is all over the map. And even for the clients that have received the initial $10,000 on the EIDL, they still don't know what their actual EIDL loan amount is because the SBA determines it.
Oh, but they've gotten the $10,000, but they have no idea. Oh, that's weird. I would have seen that.
Yeah, they have no idea what their actual loan amount is, what the, we know what the terms are, but they don't know what the amount is. And so I think that could be, pretty variable. I still think if people can if they can apply and get approved for EIDL, I think that is the best long-term strategy, not knowing how long this is going to last.
Yeah.
Because again, the PPP assumes that this is only, you can actually even read it in like the interim guidance. They say that the impact of this will definitely be over like in a matter of months.
Yeah.
And I think that's not true. I think
in your opinion? Yeah.
That's my opinion, that is not true.
Gotcha.
And so there will be like additional rounds of this, but the EIDL represents to me the best long-term stability because we don't know exactly what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. So what criteria are they using to determine how much you get for the EIDL?
I think that's a mystery.
Oh.
I don't think anybody really knows. The only things that they're really saying about EIDL right now are, I'll step that back a little bit. So historically, when you filled out an application for EIDL, it was because you were dealing with like a hurricane or an earthquake or some kind of natural disaster, right? And so you could pretty easily show like what your economic damage was, because if your office was totally destroyed and you were not seeing any patients, and you have some estimate, like we're going to have your office rebuilt by such and such a date, whatever the case may be, you could make a pretty good argument on paper for what your actual losses were going to be. Yeah. And I think EIDL was based on that. So in this case, I know my doctors that have filled out the EIDL applications have looked at like what was their production, for the past 12 months.
Yeah.
And then try to project out, right now we know we've been closed for this many months. It's really speculation as to like how much this is going to impact the bottom line over the rest of the year. So my guess is that they will have, the SBA will use some kind of formula, and I think you're just going to get some kind of amount over that $10,000. And there's also the possibility that the 10,000, the 10,000 you have to roll into your PPP if you get approved for PPP.
Yeah.
So that's a whole other element. But even if the way the EIDL always worked was that if you requested the $10,000 emergency funds up front, even if you end up not qualifying, because to qualify for the EIDL loan is a little more stringent than PPP, which basically has, there really are there's nothing to qualify you except to say that I had a legitimate business entity that meets these guidelines as of February 15th of this year.
Yeah.
And I can show this amount of payroll.
Gotcha.
So the bar is pretty low for the PPP. I think EIDL is a little more in depth.
Okay.
And so, I don't know. I just know that if you could get the $10,000 and then they may not approve you for anything else. And then that's the grant,
So you kind of win no matter what. It's not that.
Yeah, you kind of win no matter what. I think everybody should be applying for EIDL regardless. Because even if you applied and even if you don't get in for the second round of funding for PPP, you may get the 10,000, which is better than nothing. And if it's not tied to your PPP, there really aren't a lot of strings attached to that 10,000. It's, literally just a grant from the SBA. So it's not as particular as the PPP, where you have, 25% is on qualifying expenses, 75% is on payroll. And then, there are lots of other sort of qualifiers.
Yeah.
And I think that is also like a source of anxiety for everyone with these loans. And it's sort of encouraging this kind of like, we have to bring everyone back on payroll right away.
Yeah.
You do. As soon as those funds are dispersed, I will say in the interim guidelines published by the Department of Treasury, this is something else I would recommend for everyone to do. I think, everyone should be going to the Department of Treasury website. Everyone should be looking at the Code of Federal Regulations. There's nothing that says that you can't read those things and understand them,
Okay, yeah.
Because everyone's kind of like listening to everyone else's opinion about what this means. Like, what are the SBA guidelines and what is the Department of Treasury? Like, what are these interim rules that they have? I would just encourage everyone to go and read those for themselves and like take a little bit of responsibility in the sense that, you feel like very familiar with what those rules and guidelines are.
Sure.
I think it'll help inform how you spend the money, how you account for it. I know we talked about last time, but I think it's imperative that we have separate bank accounts. For the PPP loan, if you get EIDL, that should be another separate account. You want to be able to very carefully follow the flow of that money so that when you go back for forgiveness, the likelihood of your getting it all forgiven or most of it is very high in that way. So, it's called if you go to the Department of Treasury's website, it's actually Chapter 13 of the Code of Federal Regulations now.
Yeah.
It shows the temporary changes to the SBA loan program. They're calling it the interim final rule, which sounds like an oxymoron.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
But really all that means is that in the interim, there are changes to the way we are going to fund SBA loans.
Gotcha.
So these are interim guidelines and rules that apply just to this SBA loan, the PPP. But I don't know, and maybe everyone is not like me, but I feel my overall anxiety is lowered when I have a good grasp of information. So, rather than letting my lender tell me, because I'll tell you, like, the lenders don't, they from the beginning, I talked to a couple of small bankers, one that lives in my neighborhood, one that is the lender for a friend of mine who owns a restaurant.
Yes.
In the very early days of the PPP, and they were very upfront in saying, we don't really know like the rules for forgiveness, and we don't really know all of the rules that are going to qualify someone for this loan, which is why a lot of businesses got qualified that probably shouldn't have and are now, pledging to give the money back.
Okay.
But the Department of Treasury and the SBA actually say directly that it's not the lender's responsibility it's the borrower's responsibility to certify that they qualify for the loan. So anyway, that's just, I would recommend that to
everyone. That's pretty eye-opening. It's not the lender's responsibility. I would have assumed it.
Mm-hmm. Right. But if you misuse the funds, or if you applied and you weren't, really qualified to receive them, then, you could be charged with fraud at some later point when the pandemic is over, maybe.
Wow. Awesome. Yeah. I don't think any of us will have that problem, but it's good to know.
The point being, just because that is the case doesn't mean that you won't have a lender or some other person telling you, including me. I mean, you should just go read it for yourself and then feel comfortable about what you're doing, is, I guess, my ultimate guidance. I think it would take less than an hour to go to the SBA site or the Department of Treasury site and just go through that. And most likely it's going to line up with what, your advisors or consultants or your CPA, it's probably going to line up with what they're telling you anyway. Yeah. But I think at the end of the day, you feel a little more secure about your own decision making, when you have all of the information at your fingertips.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Why don't we put on your consultant hat? So we have day one. I have some clients that are opening next week.
Yes.
What would you say? What should the first week look like for the team? As you're the doctor, getting everyone ready, what would you suggest we do?
Yeah. So I think, for my clients that are planning to open next week or the week after, I believe that their scheduling is going to dictate, a lot of how this looks in combination with the guidelines coming from the ADA and their state dental societies.
Yeah.
But, if they're opening next week, then I imagine that they're putting patients into the schedule like this week. There's a lot of unknowns. I mean, we don't know how many parents are going to bring their kids in. I think that's going to vary greatly depending on probably the part of the country that you're in.
Yeah.
People's various perceived levels of risk and what they feel is an appropriate risk and what's not. I think that a lot of, the state dental societies and the ADA are making recommendations on how many patients you can have in the building at one time. So there's necessarily, even if all the parents had no, kind of qualms about bringing their kids in for appointments, we're still going to be restricted just by the guidelines from the dental societies. So how many patients can we have in the office? One of the questions that I've had that I haven't seen answered is how many employees can we have in the office? So, if we're under stay-at-home orders, and I know in Ohio, I think that they're still saying 10 people, like in a gathering, that you should never have more than 10. So does that apply in the workplace? I mean, because it would be really easy to reach, a number of 10 people when you take into account the doctor, staff, and patients. Yeah, so I'm not sure if that will apply, but all of those things and all of the recommendations that we were making before this happened, I think those all are going to be back in place and then some. So, initially we were having the patient's family wait in the car. They would call when they get there. When their area is sort of sterilized and ready for them, then the office would text them that they could come in.
We've had at least 2 guests say they love that process and actually want to keep doing it forever because it's making everything so much more efficient. I was like,
yeah,
oh, interesting.
I mean, I think there will be people on both sides of that. If I were the orthodontist, I would probably love it because I like efficiency and things being streamlined. I think there are other people who love having the families in the office and the siblings, and they really enjoy the social aspect. And that's kind of, what makes an ortho office what it is.
That's how I think of it from a brand manager standpoint. I'm like,
right.
That's time you're building that relationship with them. That's important time.
Exactly.
But I totally understand it from an efficiency standpoint.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to look very unusual for a while in terms of how we see patients. We were asking the patients to come in to first wash their hands. Then we were asking them to brush their teeth and to use a peroxide-based mouthwash.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, there were studies that show that reduces viral load in the oral cavity using a hydrogen peroxide mouthwash. So we still would be recommending that. Then the patient would take their seat, and I would assume that procedures that could be done by one person will be done by one person just to minimize exposure. There are some, of course, procedures the doctor has to have an assistant for. The doctor will have to check every patient, obviously, before they walk out the door. I think the N95 masks are obviously the highest level of protection and what I would recommend, which leads us to a whole other situation, which is, for those offices that are opening next week, have they secured proper PPE?
Yeah, because then it's going to be a shortage of it. You can't just assume you're able to order it overnight or something.
Right. There are shortages. So I would say, with the hospitals being on the front lines and needing all of that PPE, I'm not sure. I do know that the legislation that went through yesterday is providing additional funding to hospitals and healthcare workers. I think in an attempt to alleviate this issue, which is kind of crazy that we're even having that issue. So yeah, I think, I believe that that's something that's being looked at and hopefully, won't be an issue for much longer for our clients. But I know in the beginning it is going to be an issue. So that'll be another, sort of strategy that they're going to have to come up with, which is how much PPE do we have? What are we required to use? I know everybody wants to make sure they're protected, their patients are protected, and their employees are protected. And so the schedule is obviously going to have to conform to that a bit too, because in the beginning, I would assume you might have more PPE, in 1 week or 1 month than you may be able to get the following week or the following month. I don't think that anybody is sitting on a stockpile of PPE right now.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be a fluid situation that's going to depend so much on the supply chain here, and where that takes us. But definitely there's beefed up PPE, and I don't think, I haven't. I'll probably be talking with clients of ours that are going to be opening in the next couple of weeks about that. The furthest I've gotten with anyone is just that they've placed orders for those things that they know they need, but I don't know if, they've heard back that they can or can't receive those.
Has it been fulfilled yet? Ah, that's interesting.
Yeah. What about your clients? Have you heard about?
No, we haven't addressed that specific issue with them. They haven't seemed concerned about it, but now that you're talking about it, I think I'll ask them.
Yeah, I'm really wondering about that, honestly.
I'm also, I know they're going to be checking their temperatures before. So does everyone have the equipment to even just do that simple procedure?
Right.
The laser one, right? So you're not touching anyone.
Exactly. Yeah. And I would be implementing that across the board for employees, for patients.
That makes sense to do it for the employees too, of course.
Oh yeah. I think that there's been, talk about, I want to say Henry Schein, they were talking about making or they already have the technology to do testing for COVID, like a kind of like a rapid test. But again, like testing isn't ramped up across the country yet, just in the capacity that we need it for regular healthcare.
Yeah.
But I think that will be something in the future until there's a vaccine. I think eventually our doctors will have some kind of testing available to test patients, which would ultimately be, the safest. But yeah, it's I think for everyone, flexibility is going to be really important. To understand that, if you're going back next week, it doesn't mean that in the next 12 months, there may be times where you're kind of going to be pulled back again. I think it's going to be so heavily dependent on the infection rate in different parts of the country and how that's trending, if it's going up or down or flat. And so I think the more that everyone can kind of be of the mindset that things are going to be changing, we have to be able to roll with that. I
Yeah.
think that the healthier they're going to be, as a leader for their staff, even in their personal lives, like just to not be super rigid about what you think things are going to look like when you go back. Cause I think it's going to change a lot.
Just be super adaptable, huh?
Adaptable.
Makes sense. So if you're a practice that was really experiencing a lot of growth, do you think you should just keep striving forward and just roll with the punches, or what would you say?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, we're all in business to make a living, right? And I think when at the beginning of this, when, our clients were really struggling with the decision whether to lay people off or not, all of our clients are very close to their team. And that was like a really gut wrenching decision. But the ultimate decision was we have to do this in order to preserve this business so that everyone has something to come back to.
Yeah.
So that still has to be kind of our overarching goal, right? I mean, keeping the business healthy is ultimately supporting you and your family as well as all of your employees, not to mention the service that you're offering in your community for your patients. So I think that has to be the goal. I think that it has to be realistic in the sense that we don't know yet how that's going to impact. I think because overall, and no one is quite sure. I was listening to this from an epidemiologist that was talking about opening schools,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't really know why most kids don't get sick from this virus, right?
Yeah.
So in a way, that's really good for probably pedodontists, orthodontists, right? The majority, not all. I mean, you have adult patients as well, but majority of your patients are children. So the question that kind of is remaining right now from that standpoint is we don't know if children really carry or shed this virus at high rates. So like when we start putting them back into their normal environments, like school, like the
Yeah.
orthodontist office, what is the impact going to be on people who are more susceptible to the virus? So I think we don't know that yet, and that's going to play a big role. If it turns out that we start kind of, putting kids back, it sounds like they're animals, like putting them back into their natural habitat and kind of seeing
Yeah.
what that is.
Yeah.
I think that really is though going to guide a lot of, kind of how things move forward with this for our clients. If it turns out that we start putting kids back in school, I would assume most states, I think I know in Ohio, we're done. There's no school here for the rest of the year. Is it that way where you guys are?
I don't think so, though I don't follow it because my kid's not in school.
Okay, so they haven't, yeah, and I think a lot of states haven't made like a final decision, but Ohio did this week these days are kind of all running together, but
Yeah.
this week or last week, Ohio made that.
Are they going to start school early? What is the plan? Like to make up this time where they weren't getting educated?
I don't know. Like in my son's school, he's actually had like real school. I mean, it's virtual, but it's real in the sense that like it starts at the same time every day. He shows up for each one of his class periods.
Okay, so they are learning during this. Okay.
Yeah, and they have a lot of, but he goes to a small school, so they can kind of do that. With the bigger public schools, I'm not sure what they'll do. I mean, they may go back early. I heard something else where they were talking about they may send one group of students for 1 week, and they like groups of students may rotate in and out of the building so that they can maintain distance regulations.
Gotcha.
And again, like that's an idea, but that could change if you put kids back in school and you don't see a lot of increase in infection rate from doing that, then that tells us a little bit more about like kind of how we operate in this new environment, before we have a vaccine or an effective treatment. So I think, and that's what I'm saying about the adaptability part, is I think that there's going to be a lot of this kind of back and forth over the next few months because it's all kind of experimental, right? Like we're kind of like opening the door a little bit and stepping out and seeing what happens.
It is. I mean, all of this is an experiment because there's
right
history to look at. We are
right
making history right now.
But from a positive standpoint, I mean, children always need orthodontic care. They're always going to, and It's one of the things that I think, parents will always try to make that happen for their kids. They will prioritize it above a lot of other expenses. And so I think that we'll see some decline in production this year just based off the fact that a lot of people have lost their jobs or are on unemployment. However, like as the year goes on and we start to see how things look as we kind of open up more businesses, then I think that the overall impact will not be drastic. I think it will be small and then hopefully offset by some of these government programs like the PPP loan. Because 2 months of, 2 months of your payroll plus the qualifying expenses is not insignificant in terms of a year's worth of overhead. So I do think that those things will help to offset it. And I think, it's all really speculation at this point. I think we're going to know more. Like if we sat down and talked in 3 weeks, I think we're going to know more than we know right now about, ultimately how things are going to look. I think all of our clients, their reopens are going to be very cautious. And, they're definitely taking all the precautions that they need to take for their staff and their patients. And, they're going to be doing, I think, what all of us are doing, which is taking it a day at a time and a week at a time and just seeing, what happens. And hopefully, we keep seeing the infection rate stabilize and drop and, life can be sort of, I don't think it's ever, at least for the foreseeable future, it's not going to look like what we think of as kind of normal life. But I think that, we have a lot of really smart people all over the world working on this. We have, people are pretty smart and adaptive when it comes to business. And I think that everyone will kind of do what they need to do in the interim to kind of keep things moving forward. So, I really feel like the silver lining in all of this is that I think there will be a lot of really positive change that comes out of it, which is hard to see when you're, kind of at the place where we are, which is like kind of the jumping off point, really. I think teams will be stronger when they come back to the workplace after they've gone through this together and they're able to come back. I think everyone will be much more sort of appreciative of the work that they have, right? Like I catch myself doing that every day. If I'm kind of complaining about something I'm doing with work, I'm like, I'm really actually grateful that I'm working.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm even just working from home. I love seeing my family all day. I kind of like, wow, it would be nice to be in the office and see my work family too. Like, get back to another different routine.
Well, there's definitely some benefit to the work-home separation.
So let me ask you. So I don't know if this is controversial or not, but when I was just when we were talking to Vicky, she mentioned that sometimes there's someone on the team that really is just not a good fit, and they actually can. And I use the word virus. And she's like, that's a good analogy. So let's say you have this person on your team and you laid them off. Like, I believe I know what you're going to say, but do you suggest not rehiring that person and then rehire someone else so that your PP loan is still forgiven? I assume that's how it would work.
So it's a little murky on that. And actually, I'm kind of glad that you brought this up because there was something I was, meaning to talk about, which I kind of lost. There is going to be more clarification on the SBA rules and the interim final.
Yes.
There will be on the 26th. There's supposed to be more clarification on some of these things.
Yeah.
So there are lots of open questions, which that is one of them. Like if you lay people off and there's someone you don't want to bring back, what does that do? Because, the actual rules say full-time equivalents. It is not defined. That terminology is not defined in the
full-time equivalent. So you could hire a bunch of, if you're not an orthodontist, I assume, like independent contractors.
Not independent contractors. So they have to be on payroll, but the term full-time equivalent, I don't think anybody knows exactly what that means.
Okay.
So could you, for instance, take 2 part-time positions and combine them into one full-time position?
That's be at least what I would assume it means.
Right. Like, is that a full-time equivalent? Do you have to bring back, I think that we know that you don't have to bring back the same people, but the same number of people or the same number of full-time equivalents, which I think on the 26th, hopefully they're going to give more guidelines about what full-time equivalent means.
Yeah.
Some of those other kind of questions along the same lines that pop up are, there may be employees who don't want to come back into this field of work. And so how does that affect your forgiveness? Because you're offering the job back, but for whatever reason, they're not taking the job.
Yeah.
So now you've reduced your numbers on payroll. My initial kind of feeling about this is everyone may not need the same level of staffing that they had prior to this. And again, that's probably something that they're not going to know for several weeks, because I think there will be a process of ramping up. I think orthodontists will be different from dental specialists in the sense that we have a lot of patients who have not seen the doctor for quite a while, who have sort of like some, at-home fixes to orthodontic issues or, kind of emergencies. Those patients are going to need to get back in. So I do think that most offices in the first couple of weeks are going to be kind of slammed with just seeing like their existing patient load.
Yeah, that's been other guests' opinion as well.
Yeah.
Increase hours and really handle this very systematically.
Yeah, I do think that will be the case over the next couple of weeks for sure. Probably the next month, really. Based on our clients that have been doing virtual consults, there appears to be a really good level of interest in starting new patients.
Yeah.
Again, like, I'm really hopeful actually about that. I think that they are going to be seeing new patients in the office. I think they're going to be doing a lot of follow-ups from those virtual exams that they've been doing while they were out, which has been a great use of time for them. If I had someone that wasn't coming back, I think my instinct would be, unless you feel very tight, like maybe you were just not totally staffed appropriately prior to this. So you were running short in the clinic and like everybody was kind of running their legs off and understaffed. Unless I was in that position, I don't know if I would immediately look to fill that space just for the purposes of loan forgiveness.
That's fair.
Because
loan forgiveness wouldn't apply to a temp agency, right? Or would it?
Well, is that technically no, because you're paying the temp agency. That person's not on your payroll.
Yeah.
I will say that we have recruited and hired for different clients during this, with an expected start date of, we don't know.
Yeah.
Whenever that practice reopens, there are a lot of people looking for jobs, very qualified people is what I found when I was going through resumes. So I would just, say that to kind of calm everyone's fears. I think if you're going to need to hire somebody, it's not going to be difficult to find a qualified person. So I wouldn't make that knee-jerk reaction. I would see how your schedule is flowing, how the restrictions, however those end up, and again, they're going to change over time. But at least for that first month, whatever restrictions you're going back into the office with, that's going to definitely have an impact on how many staff members you need in the office on any given day, I think.
Yeah.
So I would see if, the staff that you have coming back, if you're one short or two short, I would see how that new schedule is working with that team. If you're feeling the pressure that you really need to hire somebody, then I don't think that'll be a problem. You can bring them on within that period, and it's still going to count towards your forgiveness, as long as that's by June 30th. And so like bringing a new staff member on by June 30th. So if most practices are opening next week or the week after, that gives you a fairly good amount of time to kind of see how the team that you have is working with your current schedule.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And probably to project out a little bit into the future too, and kind of think about what are our needs going to be, because this is changing every week. And, do we need to start looking for someone?
So it's making me think, what if a doctor's about to open another office and they feel good about that plan, they have the reserves to do it. Would you say now, because of everything that's going on, there actually is a better pool of people? They have a higher chance of getting very qualified people because there's
yeah, I think so.
Supply of them?
I think there is. I mean, I think right now is ironically not a terrible time to be looking to hire. Probably right now through the end of the year, I would think. Prior to this, obviously we were having, we had really good employment levels. So finding qualified people was a little more, took a little bit more effort than I think it will right now. So yeah, if somebody has the cash reserves and they feel good about a plan to open an office and they already have those fixed expenses, that they have the building and the equipment and everything else, I think it right now is a great time to recruit.
That's interesting. Yeah. Well, silver lining there.
Yeah, there are silver linings, and there will continue to be, It's not all doom and gloom, but it is changing things for us in the short term.
Great. All right. So if anyone has any questions, how should they reach you? What's the best way?
You can always email me, mnewell@engagedortho.com. You can look on our website, engagedortho.com, and there are all the various ways to get in touch with us there.
Great. All right. Well, sounds good. Thanks for your time. We always learn a lot when you're on. We really appreciate it. Great. All right. Well, stay safe out there and have fun.
You too. Thanks, Richie.
You're welcome.
Bye.